most valuable people in real estate, deserve to hear from policy leaders about housing. And many of you may not know this, but a lot of the fantastic speakers that come to the stage at Inman actually come through the Inman community. Mr. Kennedy is here today because of Shelley Vincent, who made this all possible. So first of all, big round of a hand to Shelley.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, I am the employing broker of HomeSmart in the state of Colorado, which has over 2,500 agents and 7,000 transactions a year. My position brings great responsibility in being informed at all times of every issue that affects my agents in our industry. And recently we've had a few. Affordable housing and cost of living have been at the top of voter concerns for quite some time, yet none of the current presidential candidates have addressed it. Because I also have years of campaign management experience, I was ready to ask Mr. Kennedy some tough questions when I had the honor of meeting him at a private reception this last May. Mr. Kennedy's interest in addressing these issues led me to connecting him to Inman. Inman is an advocate for our industry, and what better way to have these conversations than to have them on the biggest stage in real estate? It is my honor to welcome Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Brad Inman.
Where do I sit here? Thank you.
You got some fans there, my friend. It's great to have you here. I really appreciate you doing this. And, you know, I'd like to do a shout out for, again, as I always do, for all the service people in the hotel that help us and make these events good, production crew. And I just watched the Secret Service in action, and it was quite amazing. So thanks to all of them for making you safe and supporting us. So this audience, Mr. Kennedy, like people around the world or the country, woke up this morning, many of them, turned on the TV, and they either watch Fox or they watch CNBC. I'd like to start out by asking you, how big of a threat is misinformation to democracy? Instead of blaming the politicians, is this a problem that we should worry about, or should we just move on and we're in a new media age and it's how it works?
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't think misinformation misinformation is information that is wrong versus disinformation, which usually refers to information that is deliberately misleading and, generally speaking, is orchestrated by powerful aggregations of power or wealth, usually traditionally intelligence agencies. But misinformation on its own is no threat to democracy. Louis Brandeis, who is one of the most famous judicial minds in American history, said, and a Supreme Court justice said, that the remedy for bad information is more information. If you live in a democracy, the primary foundation stone of a democratic system traditionally has been the free flow of information. And there's an understanding that the policies that are adopted in a democracy will have been debated in the Commons and then annealed in the furnace of fierce conversation and debate, and that the best ideas will rise in the marketplace of ideas, and they will become policies in a democracy. And that is the advantage that democracies in the minds of the framers had over totalitarian systems, because totalitarian systems are much more efficient than democracies. You don't have all the debate, you don't have the messy conversations and the compromises. You can, one guy makes the order and it gets done at every level.
But didn't that actually happen to you? Weren't you locked out of the Democratic Party in the last 6 months? Wasn't that people at the top blocking out a potential candidate that had some interesting ideas? Isn't that
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that censorship is dangerous for democracy. That misinformation in an uncensored debate, in an uncensored society, is self-correcting. Because enough people will come in and point it out.
Do you feel like they did that in your case?
I've been systematically censored, and I'm not, just saying that to complain. I'm not complaining about it. But I did, I've won a lawsuit. I'm in the Court of Appeals in a lawsuit called Biden versus Kennedy. Judge Doty, the federal judge in that, has written a 155-page decision detailing the meticulous use of federal agencies by the White House, starting 37 hours after he took the oath of office, swearing to uphold the Constitution. President Biden's White House was opening up portals to allow the CIA, the FBI, the CISA, which is another federal agency, DHS, the IRS, to censor his political opponents, most notably me. And I was subject of the debate, of the discussions, my name going back and forth from the White House to the social media. So this was government orchestrated censorship, which is illegal, and the government is now under injunction to stop it. It doesn't mean they have stopped it, but it means they're under order.
So it's pretty efficient. They got what they wanted.
They got what they wanted in that, and they deplatformed me from Instagram. I had 1 million followers, and they just wiped them out. I think the more damaging censorship to me during the campaign has been private censorship by the big media companies. So in 18 months, ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, those networks are the primary networks. I've only been on one live debate, which was on CNN on Aaron Burnett. And then this week I was allowed on my first debate, it was a live interview. I was allowed on a taped interview this week by Major Garrett on CBS. I had 2 small taped interviews on Michael Schmerkanish. And other than that, there's a blackout that is directed toward me on all the major media sites. Now, the implication for me...
But isn't there a percentage that you have to qualify for, for debates? Like, do you technically qualify for what should be, although the debates have changed already?
Yeah, I mean, my numbers, my polling, first of all, polling numbers have nothing to do with what they do or don't cover. When I had much higher polling numbers than, for example, Ross Perot. Ross Perot was on network television every night, and he ended up, getting 19% of the vote. He probably would have won the election, but he dropped out halfway through the election, and then because there was a threat against his daughter. And when he came back in, he never caught where he'd been, and he ended up with 19%. But when he left, he was almost at 40% in a 3-way race, which would have given him a clear victory.
So that's a big change. You're saying back then he was on air every night, and now you're being boxed out. What? You're alluding to a conspiracy here that some people at the top said, let's cut Kennedy off. What happened?
Well, I try not to talk to speculate about things that I don't have evidence for, but the evidence I have is that nobody is letting me on. Oh, I don't know how that decision is made or how it's come down. I talked to a friend of mine the other day, the day that President Trump was shot, the assassination attempt, and I was being asked to go on all of the News Nation, the kind of conservative networks, News Nation, Fox News, Newsmax, and others. But the mainstream media was not doing any, was not, inviting me on. And I called a friend of mine at CNN, who is my little brother's best friend. And I said to him, why don't you, he's an anchor there, and I said, why don't you have me on? And I heard him kind of, going like, ebbity, what? And then he sent me a text later and said, I can't do it. And I called him and I said, is there a written policy over there that says that you're not allowed to let me on? And he said, well, let's just put it this way. There's a big hesitancy about it. So I don't know how the message gets down. I don't know, if there's a memo or whether they do it in editorial meetings, but it definitely is a policy.
Is it also related to all the controversy over vaccine, and is this guy a whack job? I mean, you've been characterized in all sorts of ways that I find quite silly and not true, but is that why you think?
Well, I think
you have to be on the right side of science.
That's a chicken-egg question. If they decide to brand me a whack job because they didn't want me on talking about it, or do they actually believe that?
Yeah.
And, I've said for 20 years, thousands upon thousands of times, I'm not anti-vaccine. But that pejorative is applied to me as a way to silence me, to say, oh, he hates all vaccines, therefore he must be crazy, and therefore he's dangerous, and we shouldn't let him have a platform. Even if I was anti-vaccine, they should still let me on and have somebody debate me, somebody who's much smarter than me, and who can, tell people why that's not a proper belief.
I don't want to waste a lot of time on that, but because we got a lot of stuff we got to talk about here. But why don't you use this forum right now to say, here's my position, because you've been obviously an environmentalist. You've been an advocate for children's rights and children's health and things. What exactly is your vaccine position, without getting into all of the vaccines and COVID and everything? Summarize it.
Yeah, my position is that if you want a vaccine, you ought to be able to get a vaccine, but you ought to know the safety profile and the risk profile of that vaccine and the efficacy of that vaccine. And that's it.
Okay, that's good.
That's it.
Yeah, you nailed it. Part of this is about, right now, there's so much disrespect of leaders, institutions, and certainly experts. And maybe that's okay. It seems like it's a little bit of a breakdown, because when people don't respect institutions, the rule of law goes out with it. Like if the cops are beating up people in difficult neighborhoods, so what? They double park. They see what's going on. I mean, there's a correlation between a general breakdown in respect of institutions and experts. Can we fix that, or should we not worry about it?
Well, I think I can fix it.
How would you do that?
Because I make people don't trust institutions. I would make the institutions trustworthy. The first day that I get into the Oval Office, I'm going to issue an executive order that any federal official who lies to the American public in conjunction with the performance of his duty will immediately lose his job at every level of government. And then...
We wouldn't have had any leaders the last few years.
Yeah, that's true. And the whole idea, that they were telling us during COVID again and again and again, trust the experts, and then shaming people who did their own research and saying, oh, that's a bad thing, like literally saying you shouldn't do your own research. Well, trusting the experts is not a feature of either democracy or science. It's the opposite.
Say that again. I didn't get that.
It's not a feat. In democracy, you never trust the experts. My father told me, people in authority lie. Our job in a democracy, the job of being a citizen in a democracy, is to maintain a posture of fierce skepticism toward public pronouncements. You shouldn't believe anything that public tells you. So that's our duty.
And the role of the press.
And the press now lies. When I was a kid, the press was actually a check on government lying, but now they've become just bullhorns and sock puppets for the government they're supposed to be questioning. They were the ones who were telling us, the whole time, you're a bad person if you do your own research. Just do what you're told. And by the way, and it's a feature of religion, trusting the expert. It's a feature of totalitarian systems, but not democracy or science. I've brought over 500 successful lawsuits, and almost all of them involve scientific controversy. I got into law because I was interested in science, this kind of law. And on each side, in each of those lawsuits, there is an expert who says one thing based upon the evidence they're looking at, and an expert says the other. My wife, who's an actor, Cheryl Hines, came to my when I was trying the Monsanto case. She came up and watched, I watched a couple days of trial in Oakland. And Monsanto came into the trial, and they had an expert the day she sat there. There was an expert from Stanford, an expert from Yale, an expert from Harvard, all very convincing. And she said to me at the end of the day, why are you suing these poor company? They're obviously telling the truth. Listen to, what those experts said. And I said, wait till tomorrow. And then the next day, we had experts from Yale, Harvard, and Stanford. At the end of that, she came out so pissed off at Monsanto, she wanted to bury the company. So trusting the experts is not something that you ever do. Experts have their own slate of biases, and they have their own reasons, their own perception issues. They make their own statistical flaws and errors. My job as an attorney is to be able to read science critically and deconstruct it, and then take an expert, put him on the stand, and and make him break down. Because what he's saying to a lot of the experts, what they're saying to is not true. During COVID, we had a bunch of people who were in white lab coats and had, doctor in front of their name, and were telling us things that I knew at that time not to be true. Why? Because I was reading the science. I was reading the monkey studies in May of 2020. And the monkey studies, they gave the vaccine to the monkeys, and then they had a placebo group that got no vaccine, and they got the same level of SARS-CoV-2 of the coronavirus in their nasopharynx, no difference. So I knew then it could not prevent transmission. And when I said it's not going to prevent transmission, they have no proof that it's going to prevent transmission. But they were all telling us, you got to get this. You got to get this to protect grandma, because it's going to protect her from transmission. It's irresponsible of you not to get it, because you're going to infect other people, yet their own science, the only science they had was those monkey studies. That literally was the only science. And it was saying it's not going to prevent transmission, yet they were lying again and again to the public. And when I said that, they called me a conspiracy theorist. And, that brand sticks. When I said that glyphosate, which is the active ingredient of Roundup, causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, I was called a conspiracy theorist. But, I try cases in front of juries, and I'm careful about what I say and how I use science, and I'm very meticulous about it.
Another thing you get is, you're a little bit of a policy wonk. It reminds me a little of Dukakis. Like, these issues, you break them down. I don't want to say you go down rat holes, but that's not really who you are, though. You're not a... you think about this stuff, but this day and age, people...
I would say I am. I'm not. I wouldn't compare myself to Dukakis.
He was a good candidate.
He was a good guy. But I do go... I want to understand how things work, and I want to understand, ultimately, I think all of our function here in the universe is to pursue existential truths, to really understand what the objective truth is. And for me, that requires me to go granular on every issue. So any issue that I go on, whether it's Israel and Gaza or Ukraine or any of the issues, economic issues, I really, I read voraciously, I question people, I try to understand both sides of I talk to people always on both sides, and try to figure out what actually is true.
So you don't wake up in the morning preparing your sound bites.
No.
We're now reacting to sound bites and what's hot and and there doesn't seem to be any depth, and you seem to offer that. Let's move. You just mentioned, I guess, Ukraine or the Middle East.
By the way, let me just say one thing. When my Aunt Jackie Kennedy, when she met my uncle, for the first time, he was a senator in 1956, and she was interviewing him for a newspaper, and she asked him a question, and she said, "What is your greatest quality?" And she thought he was going to say courage, because he was a war hero during World War II. He's the only president who earned the Purple Heart. He wrote a book on courage called Profiles of Courage, for which he won the Pulitzer Prize. And it was about all these different US politicians who had put their careers behind love for our country. And so she thought he'd say courage. That's not what he said. He said curiosity. And, you know, to me, that more and more, the longer I live, to me, that seems like one of the greatest, most important things
I agree
people
with you
can
on that.
have. Yeah.
You mentioned the war, though, and we spent $2 trillion, I think, I'm rounding out numbers here, on 2 failed wars. We're now up to 300 or 400 billion in Ukraine.
In Iraq and
Afghanistan. I think it's 2 trillion.
It's 3.6 trillion.
See, it's thank you. Correct the press. We need to be corrected. So 3.6, okay, we're what, several $100 billion into Ukraine, if not more. We're several $100 billion into the Middle East. We probably spent a ton of money we're not aware of already in what could be an unfolding conflict in Asia. Can this country afford that anymore? Another trillion or 3.6 collective trillion and 2. Can we afford that? And isn't it time to at least change it, shut it down, do something so that we can have that great peace dividend like we had at the end of the Cold War in the 90s, and we had a roaring economy, we had all kinds of good things that happened during that decade?
Yeah, we were promised a peace dividend in 1992 when the walls came down. And at that time, our military budget was about $6 billion, and we were told that it was going to be cut down to $2 billion, and that would be enough to protect the homeland, to protect the neutral areas, the sea lanes, neutral areas like the Arctic, and be able to fight to not full-scale wars, but basically to fight incidents on 2 fronts. And but we never got it. It went up.
But we balanced the budget as a function of the cutbacks, correct?
We didn't really balance the budget. I mean, the thing that got us out of those early deficits was Silicon Valley, was the explosion of the tech industry. And that's really the only way to get out of deficits, is to develop new industries or to shift the money away from the military toward things that are going to grow your GDP. You cannot cut your way out of it at $35 trillion. We turned $35 trillion yesterday. You can't ever cut your way out of it. You have to cut the things that are not growing GDP, and you have to apply them to grow to GDP. But let me say this, which is a side issue. We cannot fight a war anymore. We spent all this money in Iraq, as you point out, 3.6 trillion, and what did we get for it? Iraq is now worse off than we found it. We killed more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein. We drove Iraq. Iraq is now just an incoherent, it's not really a nation, it's just a warring bucket of Shia and Sunni death squads. We pushed it into a proxy posture with Iran, which is exactly the foreign policy outcome we've been trying to avoid for 30 years. We created ISIS. We drove 4 million refugees up into Europe, and we destabilized every nation in Europe. They're all, riots today. That ended up with Brexit breaking up Europe, and now, we're doing the same thing with the Ukraine war, which is, and we're poor. We're $4 trillion poor. Ukraine war has driven Russia, which should be our ally, into a alliance, a very deadly alliance with China and with Iran, which never was an ally of Russia ever in history. And they're now all aligned against us, and they're stronger than we are. We're acting like we could still win a war. We can't win a war in this country anymore. Why is that? We won World War II because we had an industrial base in this country. We had the automobile industry. We were making ball bearings. We were making steel plate. We were the biggest manufacturer in the world. And we were able to repurpose that to make 56,000 airplanes a month, a ship a day, this extraordinary arsenal of democracy. Well, what happens if we have to do that today? We can't do it. We don't have any industrial base. We've exported our entire industrial base to China. we've stopped teaching the trades in school. That's how irrelevant industry is to our country. You have a generation of students now, under 20s, millennials and Gen X, who don't know how to hammer a nail. They don't know how to use a jigsaw. They don't know how to put in rivets or anything that you need to do to have the population to make an industrial base. And we have no infrastructure. The Chinese do, because we exported it there. The next war is going to be a drone war. China has one company, just one of many, many companies that make drones. One company makes 76% of the drones in the world. And that is those are the assets that are going to win the next war. Iran too, and they have, and then they also have hypersonic missiles. We have a 12 aircraft carrier, the most advanced aircraft carrier in the world. China only has 2. But all of our hypersonic missiles cannot be stopped. They explode like a nuclear bomb.
But that would suggest we should spend more in military.
Well, what I'm saying is all 12 of our aircraft carrier will be at the bottom of the ocean the first 24 hours of a war. So we can't yet, and that's what the Trump people are now saying, because this Pentagon report came out yesterday. It says America can no longer fight a war. President Trump is saying, well, we need to increase our military. That's the opposite of what we need to do. What we need to do is cut the military in half. The military we have now is not about national defense. We went from $6 billion, and we were told it was going to go to $2 billion. It's now $1.3 trillion. If you throw in the nuke program and the national security and the exports to Ukraine, the straight Pentagon budget is $900 billion. We need to cut that in half, and that's what I'll do. You can protect our country. That is adequate. That is more. And we were spending in 2024 dollars at the height of the Cold War. Why do we need more money now in the military than at the height of the Cold War? Because we're not spending it on national defense. We're spending it on global domination. We have 800 bases abroad. The Chinese have 1.5. The Russians have 1.
You're scaring the shit out of me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Anyway, that's all right. You mentioned something about how to grow an economy. The old economic principle was just what you said, increase productivity through technology. The second thing, though, is expand the labor force. A big part of America's success economically over history is open borders and allowing people to come into this country. You're seeing it already in New York City. I'm seeing when I go there, they're digesting these immigrants, even though there's controversy. They're at work. You see a young white girl training an immigrant to how to wait tables and how to pick up dishes, and they're absorbing these. And it's helping, I would argue, already, and I'm not taking a position on this, the New York economy. Then there's the flip side of letting in all the illegal. Where do you stand on immigration? And it seems like everyone's failing at figuring that out.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that there is a net gain to the New York economy from the 110,000.
Not yet, but it could happen.
Well, yeah, it could happen. But here's what I think. I think we cannot let the Sinaloa drug cartel run our immigration policy. We need to close the southern border and close it and secure it so that people are not coming across. And you're right, we need people in this country. We need workers in this country. There's 10 million jobs, and particularly I talk to small business people every day. And the two things they talk about is taxes and no available labor. We need to get them labor, but we need to do that by widening the gates for legal immigration, having
But wait a second, so you say close the border.
Close the border.
And then you just have a tight little funnel like we had out here for security to let people in some way that...
Oh, well, you know, there's millions of people who are trying to get in this country legally. They're waiting in line. Some have to wait 7 or 8 years. We need to hasten that so they can get it right.
What is that, the bureaucracy that you're going to go in and somehow change?
Yeah, we're going to make sure that there's personnel. We're going to change the rules to make a faster path to citizenship and make sure that every business in this country that need worker can get them right away. Yep. You know, and even if we have to create a new class of visas, but those job. If we're going to keep our Social Security system solvent for a couple more years, we need people paying taxes, we need people working, we need small business to flourish. And that means getting a lot more workers in this country. But the people that we need to bring in are not people from, emptying the prisons in El Salvador and Cuba and, and China. They're people that who want to come in, who've waited in line and who've gone through the process and are not just paying $10,000 to the Sinaloa drug dealers to smuggle them across. And I've sat there at the border, watched 300 people come across in 2 hours between 2 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the morning at Yuma. And they were coming up in giant white buses, brand new, that were all owned by the cartel. 55 people a bus. The first 2 buses emptied out. They were all young men from West Africa of military age. They came across, and then the second 2 buses, that's another 110 people, were mainly from Asia. They were from Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. I talked to every one of them. China, most of them were from China. There was only 2 from Latin America the entire night, and they were the only ones who had asylum claims. The rest of them said, we want to be here to work. But they're not the people who are obeying the law or going through the process. But
not everybody that's coming across. You're saying everybody is a threat like that? I mean, that.
Oh, no, I don't know. There's no way to know who's a threat and who's not. But there's a lot of people coming across, almost certainly.
That are a threat.
Or threats, yeah.
Is that the Achilles heel for the Democrats? I mean, it seems like it is.
I think it is, particularly for Kamala, because she was in charge of the border. So I think she has. I think that she has a lot to explain about that, and then I think she has another vulnerability, which is that it feels like she was gaslighting us on President Biden's condition, because she was meeting President Biden every day and coming out and saying he's great. And so I think she has some of those vulnerabilities.
She has incredible momentum, though. I feel like their campaign to bring her in, they'd had been working on that for 6 months. Someone did just come up with all that, the brat summer, all of that was very clever and seemed very effective. And maybe that's normal for a honeymoon of a candidate.
Nothing was normal about this.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Let's shift to the economy really quick. We have a bunch of people here that are very worried, and all over the world I found are worried about housing affordability. And you're one, I think, the only candidate that's really come forth with a set of policies on housing. And I don't want to get into the weeds. You're not a real estate expert. We didn't invite you up for that. But what's your recommendation of what we might do to tackle housing affordability?
I mean, what I'm most worried about is that we're seeing more and more. First of all, the affordability. We've gone from the average home price $215,000 2 years ago to $400,000 now, and the interest rate 7%. I have 7 kids. My oldest is 40, and he's in a home. His younger siblings all went to the best colleges. They all have great jobs, and none of them is contemplating buying a home. And I love the fact.
Have you not offered to pay their down payment or help them out at all?
A couple of them are already on the payroll, and I'm trying to get them off the payroll. But I can. But I love them living at home. But it's not, it's not the American dream. We had this country when I was a kid was the wealthiest country on earth. We owned half the wealth on the planet when my uncle was president. And part of that was because, the industrial base of Europe was destroyed during World War II. Ours was cooking, and we were making everybody in the world. We made all the transistor radios, all the television sets in the world. We made the cars that everybody wanted. We made blue jeans. Everything people wanted was American at that time. But even more important, after World War II, we got every American into a home. So the GI Bill did part of that, the highway system, and a lot of other federal laws that made it very, very easy. And at that time, there were no zoning laws, really. There were no local, planning laws, so it was very easy to build big housing tracts. And average price of a home, the average income when I was a kid was $5,000. The average price of a home was about $7,000. So everybody could get into a home. And then once you're in a home, everything changes. Because now you care about your community, you care about your schools, about your police, about your transportation, about your hospital, your healthcare. You care about the appearance of your home, you care about your neighbors, but more importantly, most importantly, you have equity, which means you can borrow money. And if you can borrow money and you have an entrepreneurial impulse, you can pursue it. So you can build a yoga studio or a bowling alley or a sporting goods store or a bookstore or whatever. And this ferment of economic activity that was rooted in home ownership when I was a kid made our country the wealthiest country in history. We owned half the wealth on the face of the earth, and the American middle class was the greatest economic engine in the history of mankind, and it was all rooted in home ownership. When we're going today from a nation of owners to a nation of renters, and when we do that, we're going to go from being citizens to being subjects. It's the old feudal model, it's the colonial model, where the wealthy own the land, they own all the means of production, and the rest of us are working for them, and it's not...
So what do we do about it? What do we do about it?
Number one, I would make it much less advantageous in the tax code for these big investment houses, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, Fidelity, Blackstone, to buy tens of thousands of houses. And that, I think 30% of the houses last year were bought or 26% were bought by investment firms. And so many people I know had the experience of having a house going into escrow on a property, and we're about to sign a contract, and at the last minute, somebody comes along and buys the house at 20% over asking price for cash. And you say, well, who is that who just grabbed my house? And then it's an LLC with an ambiguous name, and then you follow the strings, and it leads you back to one of these.
So you would remove the tax incentives for that, and get them out of the business, freeing up that supply.
I would also, yes. I would also, I'm going to create what my uncle created, which is a 3% mortgage for first-time home buyers for lower price housing, with a cap on it. That's not going to work unless we also dramatically increase the housing stock. So we need to do that, and I'm going to. The President of the United States and the federal government has very little control over zoning laws and over planning board laws, but there are incentive systems, and I'm going to assemble a task force to create incentives for localities to ease their planning regulations, zoning regulations, to allow sensible development of tiny houses, for example. We now have the capacity. We think of low-income housing, and it's these big, ugly monstrosities, but that is not how it has to be. There's such wonderful innovations in housing right now, prefab housing that are very, very cheap to make. That's very environmental. They're beautifully proportioned, and then to allow people to build accessory housing, little granny shacks behind their houses.
It's on fire in California.
Yeah,
I said that, but California, they're building like crazy. Everybody I know that owns a house, and the supply is going to increase. Yeah. So you would allow that to happen, or somehow intervene to do that?
I would encourage that to happen. I'm going to, I'm also going to bring in, I'm going to start a domestic Peace Corps. So a lot of the people who might otherwise only have an option to go to the military can do their service to America. And I'm going to there's 280 malls that have gone bankrupt in this country, and I'm going to turn those into factories to build prefab houses, and I'm going to bring kids into those factories and teach them the trades, teach them electricity, HVAC, carpentry, and start rebuilding the
You got a lot of realtors that can't, in this market, there are no transactions, so they'll probably sign up for your domestic Peace Corps. Let's move to something else. I often talk about we talk about income inequality, but it's always on the income side. I'll call it a financial statement. The other side is the debit side. If you're poor, middle class, you're paying 29% credit card debt. We threw out fiduciaries. There are payday lenders, cigarettes and taxes, which mostly the poor and the middle class. You look at lottery tickets, you look at just so many things. And whenever anybody looks at that, they always look at the income side. Not that we shouldn't tackle that. But the debit side, if you take all that and add it up, 30% of what income they do get from Social Security or for minimum wage jobs is being eaten up by all of these other things that are all promoted by special interests. And we let them get away with it. And I wish someone would attack that, because that hurts the poor as much as not having enough income.
I have a friend who's been a lifetime friend of mine, who's a commercial fisherman out of Wellfleet, Massachusetts, and he's struggling, right? He handed his fishing business down to his son, but he doesn't have a pension or anything. He sent me a screenshot of his credit card bill the other day, and the interest rate was 37%. If the mafia did that to you,
that's why we had usury laws.
They go to jail for loan sharking. But that company, Visa, MasterCard, Citibank, Chase, and they're all owned by BlackRock. Owns all of them. So, and they're controlling the Democratic and Republican parties, and this year, 2 months ago, we turned over $1 trillion in credit card debt to individual Americans. And it's insane, and they're all being milked. It's like a giant vacuum cleaner that is just strip mining the wealth from the American middle class and setting it up. During the COVID lockdowns, President Trump, President Biden created a billionaire a day globally. In 500 days, 500 new billionaires, and we shifted $4.3 trillion from the American middle class to this new oligarchy of billionaires. And we now have, like you say, 60% of Americans would not put their hands on $500 if they have an emergency. And if you're in that cohort and the engine light comes on in your car, it's the apocalypse. Because you're not going to pay the mechanic. You're going to lose your automobile. You're going to lose your ride to work. You're going to lose your income, and then you're going to lose your apartment, and you're going to end up on the street. And you go to any of our big cities, LA or San Francisco, and see the armies of people on the street, and they're not there because they're mentally ill or because they're drug addicts. A lot of them become mentally ill once they get on that street. And most of them are there because of an unexpected expense, 2 flat tires at the same time. And it's not an accident that 50% of the homeless in this country are in California. Homelessness is related to one correlate, which is housing prices. That's what it is. So the higher the housing prices in that city, the more homeless you're going to have.
It really trickles down to the regular person. So let me, it seems to me right now, I am sitting next to what could be one of the most powerful people in the world. And the reason I say that, you are now at 6 to 12%, whatever, I've seen different polls, where you play this out, like you said, Perot pulled out, you play it out to the end, right? Or you, in the next 97 days, stand up and say you should do this or you should do that with all these people that support you. And so whatever happens in the election, it seems to me you're in a position to influence the outcome. Is that?
Yeah, and I'm in a position to win if things break my way. So the polls that show me with those lower numbers are usually polls that are rigged. They rig them, and now the mainstream media has started to rig them all the same way, which is they just ask about a two-way race between Trump or Biden, and if the subject of that poll says other, then they're pushed to another field, which allows them to write in my name or gives them a choice between me, Stein, and Cornel West. So when they do the poll the right way, which is to show all 5 names, I usually end up with 15 to 20% of the vote. In every poll I have higher favorability ratings than President Trump or President Biden, so people would prefer to vote for me. They're not doing that because they're scared that they're throwing away their vote and the other guy is going to get in and wreck the republic. I win among independents. So an independents this year is the biggest political party for the first time in history. In fact, it's bigger than the other 2 combined. Most recent Gallup poll shows that self-identified independents are 51% of Americans. I win with young people. I'm really killing it with young people. Under 35, I beat everybody. Under 45, I beat President Trump and President Biden in the battleground states. The one group that I do badly with, and this is the group that's most important because they vote the most, is baby boomers. And baby boomers should like me because I think...
Well, you're one of them.
Yeah, because I'm one of them, and they all remember Camelot, and they lived through the Kennedy era, and a lot of them have nostalgia and affection for my family. They also loved me when I was just the environmental champion before I took on more controversial issues. The problem is that they never see me. So the people I do well with...
Because they're watching mainstream media this time.
Yeah, the people I do well with are people who watch podcasts and long-form interviews and social media. But if you are living in this ecosystem, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and then the network television, you're going to have a really low opinion of me. And I mean, I wouldn't vote for myself if I believed what CNN says about me, right? So, I have to somehow break through. And if the networks, if I got on the debate stage, I think it could be transformational. They're not going to want me on the debate stage.
Any shot at that? Anything?
Well, I mean, they should put me on. Legally, they need to put me on. Yeah. But, they didn't do it the last time. Now I'm on as of yesterday, I have enough signatures to be on the ballot in 42 states. By the end of next week, I'll be on every state.
Are you in Are you in the 4 or 5 states that are so important now, Georgia?
I'm in every state except for 7 states.
Okay. Maybe not stand because of freak out the Secret Service, but I'm going to allow, and I didn't ask my team if this is okay. There's probably a reason or not. We're live streaming, so I promise to repeat it. But shout out a question or 2 for Mr. Kennedy. Are you willing?
Yeah.
Yep. Just real quick. Don't stand.
Yeah. What percentage chance to give yourself to win?
Percent chance. The question was, what percentage do you get?
That's a really good question, but I'm not going to answer it because I never make predictions. I stopped making predictions in 2016 when President Trump won the election because I said he'll never win, and so I don't.
You're in Vegas. Good odds.
I know. I'm going to be unpopular for not putting odds on it now. But I mean, clearly certain things have to break my way. If I get on this stage, I would put it on debate stage. It would be very, very different. But you know what? This is the most volatile, dynamic election that we've had in, at least since 1968, maybe in our history, with so many, unpredictable things happening, and it changes every week. So I'm very optimistic that if I can get in front of the baby boomers, I win.
There's a strategy for that. You can figure that out. You're a Kennedy.
Yeah.
Nope. Anyway, a couple more.
Companies like BlackRock be broken up.
You can't break up BlackRock because at least you can't do it overnight. I think over the long term, entities that are that large, it's not healthy for a democracy. But BlackRock is locked into all of our realities. It's managing the pension funds for the police, for the teachers, for the firefighters. So you don't want to destroy BlackRock because it owns, those three companies own 88% of the S&P 500. And we want the S&P 500 to continue, but what you can do with BlackRock is you can say, you can start correcting some of its worst abuses. For example, BlackRock owns all the meat packers. There's only 4 meat packers in this country. BlackRock owns them all. And you can say to them, you need to, we're going to do antitrust suits against those meat packers. The meat packers are keeping the price of meat high and the price of cows low. So the farmer gets hurt, the consumers get hurt, and they make the money because they've got a monopoly. There are many other things like, BlackRock owns all the pharmaceutical companies, and we can start regulating the pharmaceutical companies so that they behave less like a cartel. And if you have a president who understands that, I've sued all of the regulatory agencies, almost all of them. I've sued EPA repeatedly, probably more than anybody else. USDA, the Department of Agriculture, NIH, CDC, FDA. I just won a big case against the Federal Communications Commission for lying to the public about cell phone radiation, about the safety. I'm suing DOT right now. And when you litigate against one of these agencies, you get a PhD in corporate capture and this corrupt merger of state and corporate power, and you understand how to unravel it. And, I've been thinking about this for 40 years, so I think I'm going to be really good beginning on day one about fixing these agencies so they start to serve the public interest rather than act simply as subsidiaries for the industries they're supposed to regulate.
Let's take a couple more. Yes.
Will you promise that whether you win or lose this election, you will not give up on America and you will not let Americans give up on themselves?
Wow, powerful. That was powerful.
Will not give up on America?
Would you promise, if you're not elected, that you will commit to helping America not give up on itself? Did I get it right?
Absolutely. My whole life is committed to that. But thank you for reminding me.
Okay, come on, one more. And I'm sorry, I'll repeat. So say it again. The question is about nuclear energy.
Yeah, listen, I spent 10 years as a partner in Vantage Point, which is the biggest green tech venture capital firm in the country. I was instrumental. In fact, I was a key in building a power plant that's just a few miles from here, Ivanpah, which is the biggest solar thermal power plant in the country. I build power plants. I know what the prices are, and I know, and I believe in free market capitalism. I believe that we ought to, the best thing that you could do to the environment is to have true free market capitalism, because free markets incentivize good behavior and they punish bad behavior. They would require us to act efficiently, and efficiency means the end of waste, and pollution is waste. And in a true free market economy, you can't make yourself rich without making your neighbors rich and without enriching your community. So I don't like subsidies. Today the cost of building a solar plant today is $1 billion a gigawatt. The cost of building a wind plant, just the capital cost, $1.1 billion, and then it's free energy forever. The cost of building a coal plant is $3.6 billion a gigawatt, so it's 3 or 4 times the cost of wind and solar, and then you have to pay for the coal and all the contamination and poisoning the rivers with mercury and creating acid rain and all this other stuff. A solar plant or a nuke plant, I'm all for nuke if they can make it economic and if they can make it safe. So I would argue to you that it's not economic at all. The last nuclear plant built in this country was 10 years overdue, and it cost $14 billion a gigawatt. So 14 times the the cost of building solar. So you can make energy by burning prime rib if you wanted to. But I'm for using the cheapest forms, and we have abundance of those in this country.
And so what is it, wind, solar, which ones are you saying?
Well, you know, there's many. There's wind, solar, geothermal. It's all. What we really need to do, it's a larger issue, is to create a grid where we can transport energy, an energy grid back and forth, and that's what I'm going to do as president. And then the cheapest forms of energy in each region will begin to dominate in the marketplace. But I'll just finish about nukes. People say that nukes are safe, and you can make the argument that they're safer than other forms of energy, but if you live near Chernobyl or Fukushima or you're fishing anywhere in the Atlantic, you know, they're not that safe. But here's the problem, that they can't get an insurance policy. So, you know, they had to go to Congress in the middle of the night in a sleazy legislative maneuver and get Congress to pass the Price-Anderson Act that says if there's a nuclear accident in your neighborhood, that they don't have to pay for it. If your house gets contaminated, you pay for that. So they're insulated from the cause of their mistakes. And to me, that's not free market capitalism. And then, you know, it's not a bunch of hippies saying they're unsafe in tie-dye. It's the guys in suits from Lloyd's of London and AIG who says, we're not going to give you an insurance policy because what you're doing is so dangerous that we don't want to insure you. And then there is the cost of waste disposal. They said they'd have a solution to that by the time these plants had to retire, but they still don't. We still don't know what to do. We're housing all this dangerous stuff on site for the next 30,000 years, which is 5 times the length of recorded human history. And how you think that is economic, if you had to internalize that, you know, nobody would. There's not a single public utility on Earth that will build a nuclear power plant unless it's fully subsidized by the taxpayer. So I would say the day that they can make it economic, I'm all for it. The day they can make it safe and get their own insurance policy, I'm all for it.
One last one. Who's got something?
Will you reverse the Department of Justice's decision towards the real estate industry to stop the fragmentation they created?
Will you turn the DOJ heat off the real estate industry, right?
Yeah. So
okay.
Right now they created a fragmented industry now because of what's going on. Will you reverse what just happened with the Department of Justice?
This is kind of an inside issue, but it became a public issue.
And I know a little bit about the issue, and what I know about it seems counterproductive, it seems unjust, and it does not seem rational. But I don't know enough about it to tell you right now that I will undo it. I will tell you this, that I will listen to what all of you guys are saying, and I'm going to figure out something that makes sense, that makes sense. You know, we want realtors in all of our communities are key small business people, and we want to build small business in this country, and I want my administration. I'm going to build an administration that is absolutely more friendly to small business than any administration that's ever been in our country. I want to build it, and you know, I know what bureaucracies do and technocrats do, and it looks, when I first read about it, you know, the minimum I've read about it, that they're acting like an irrational technocracy, but I don't know enough. I'd have to see the other side too. But I promise you I will do the right thing on that.
So let me ask a question of the audience. How many came in here as a skeptic of Mr. Kennedy? Yell it out. Just yell. Oh, nobody. They're all supporters. I don't see if you moved anybody. Thank you very much for being on our stage. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for asking questions and being here. And good luck.
Thank you all so much for being here. We hope that you'll join us in New York in January and in San Diego.